I don't even think the biggest 76ers skeptic could have predicted that through 14 games, they would have the worst record in the entire league. Worst record in the league should be saved for the teams going after Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, and the one kid from BYU. Not the teams that were in conversations to be contenders this season. It makes no sense, and there is no excuse that makes it make sense. I mean, the one excuse would be the injuries. Kenny. They've had all these injuries. And don't get me wrong, I understand the injury part of it. But the injuries is a good excuse to be slightly below 500. The injuries are a good excuse to be, again, underwhelming. There is no excuse from being dead ass last. Like in my mind, there's only a few teams that can use that injury thing as a real conversation. The Pelicans are like it. They have 90% of their salary in injured players right now. Their highest paid player that was in their lineup was Yves Messi, who was a middle of the first round pick. They called up Elfrid Payton off the street and said, "Can you hoop for us tonight?" And his ass was starting. They have all the excuses in the world to be the worst team in basketball, but guess what? They have a better record than the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, to start the year, it was Tyrese Maxey by his lonesome. You had Paul George have the hyperextended knee in the preseason, and Joel Embiid was ramping his way up, whatever the hell they told us. And then as soon as Paul George was back, I think they played one game together against the Phoenix Suns, that one game where Tyrese Maxey was sitting off the ball when the game mattered, like he didn't have 36 points, and Paul George took a shot that they ended up losing. They played that game, and then Tyrese Maxey went out with his injury. And then we finally got a moment where all of the guys were playing together, the big three, Joel, Paul, and Tyrese. And guess what happened? 6 minutes of them playing together, and Paul George re-hyperextends his knee. The injuries have existed. Do not get me wrong. But part of the reason why you bring Paul George in is to sustain the team, to just make sure that they're at least okay for the times where Joel and B weren't going to be there. We knew it, right? They told us he's not playing back-to-backs. That's cool. Paul George going to hold down the fort. At least that's what we thought. And here we are with them having a worse record in basketball. Before the season started, I made a video talking about how this year and potentially next year are going to be the most important years for the 76ers, at least in my lifetime. And as I'm recording this video, 76ers start dealing with a bone bruise and will be reevaluated in 2 days. So that's probably best case. I'm not a doctor. Worst case scenario, best case scenario, I don't know. But it says in 2 days he'll be reevaluated Monday. So hopefully he's back. Paul George, I'm still rooting for you. But before the season started, we made a video talking about how this season was going to be so important, right? Where on paper, this was the best fitting roster around Joel Embiid. It's talent for talent. I don't think they really messing with that prime Ben Simmons, Jimmy Butler, JJ Redick team. But again, with the fit with Paul George being one of the more malleable stars in the history of basketball, one of the most plug-and-play stars in the history of basketball, with Tyrese Maxey coming off his all-star appearance and just being an absolute stud in the postseason, him potentially getting better, them convincing Gershon Yabusele, who was a stud overseas, to come over and play rotational minutes, still in Caleb Martin, bringing back Kyle Lowry, who was a revelation for them in the second half of the season, or Kelly Oubre, who signed for a minimum 2 years ago and now has a real spot. This team made so much sense on paper, but pretty much everybody that I just named has been underwhelming, except for Gershon, maybe. Paul George, oh my God. And the only reason I'm making this video, I was gonna let them pass because I did talk about it on my podcast, just a little bit. Go link is in the description. I have my boy Matt on. I did talk about this 76 thing on the podcast just a little bit, but this morning when I woke up, I saw something and I was like, no way. I genuinely thought that this was a Photoshop job. I thought I was getting memed. Paul George gets real on. So they had a players-only meeting, and that was a few days ago, and it got leaked. Players-only meetings, or not players-only meetings, it was players and coaches. These type of things happen all the time in basketball. This is something I have heard throughout just talking to people. These type of meetings happen all the time, specifically when things are not going very well. This is not anything out of the ordinary. What is out of the ordinary is that somehow it got leaked to the public. Raptors fans are saying it was Nick Nurse because he be talking. But in that meeting, they talked about how Tyrese Maxey was trying to hold Joel Embiid accountable. At least that was one of the main points, asking Joel Embiid to be on time, and him saying that he kind of doesn't know what's going on out there. So Tyrese Maxey trying to hold Joel Embiid accountable, and Joel Embiid trying to hold the coaching staff accountable, I guess, because I guess they're running some type of different offense now that their team is different than last year. Regardless, it got leaked, and Paul George went on his podcast and talked about it, or Reggie Jackson. Now, I did listen to that portion of the pod, and it was clickbait. They did talk about it, but it was like 2 minutes. They didn't say anything other than it was a healthy meeting. Nothing was too crazy. We just don't know how it got leaked. How did it get leaked, Reggie? I don't know, man. I don't know who said it. And then Tony Jones reported this. When asked about Monday's team meeting in Miami, Sixers star Joel Embiid said, "Whoever leaked that is a real piece of shit." Also, it's kind of annoying having to deal with the same thing over and over and over. So you decide what that means to you. There just has never, ever in my lifetime been... There's never, ever, ever been a moment in my lifetime where the 76ers have had a normal season. It doesn't exist. It just hasn't existed. And the Paul George contract was something when we talked about it earlier this season, and I said it reminded me of something that happens in baseball occasionally, where you have a guy who's somewhat older, like Paul George, maybe towards the end of his prime / going through his slow decline in his production, and you pay him maybe more money than maybe he deserves, or of a longer contract than what he deserves, because you want to have some type of window. And in my mind, that window for the 76ers was this year and next year. The last 2 years, Paul George might be not the same player, but you're paying him for these first 2 years, and those last 2 you worry about when you worry about. And that was one thing Daryl Morey said, that there is a risk here. There's a risk giving Paul George this money and giving Paul George this amount of years, but it was a risk worth taking. And here we are. They're the worst team in basketball. It's so weird to say, man. They're the worst team in basketball. And the good thing about it is that the Eastern Conference is so trash that in order to be in the play-in, they're just 3 games out. I mean, let's be realistic. There's already a lot of rumors about the Brooklyn Nets, about them potentially moving some names. So they're not a team that's trying to win. Their fans will tell you that they would rather keep their draft pick. The Atlanta Hawks are probably more of a play-in team. And I guess 7 technically is the play-in, but more of a ladder-in play-in team. The Pistons have been a decent story with them having more wins than it took them, mid-January last season. So it's a good story, but let's be real, they're probably more of a play-in team than a 6 seed. So there's a world, of course, where the 76ers find their way in the playoffs, but that should be the bare minimum. Reminder, this is a team that is trying to win a championship. This is a team that has not been out of the second round in however long. And making it is the bare minimum. So you make it, be a play-in team, maybe see Boston in the first round or the Cavaliers in the first round. That's just a tough hill to climb over. And every single step along the way is just going to be difficult and more difficult and more difficult. So being this much in a hole, it's just awful, man. And I said before that I need a bigger sample size of Joel Embiid's play before I become one of those people that are really, really, really worried about him as a player. Of course, I'm worried that he just struggles to stay healthy. But even last night in their loss against the Memphis Grizzlies, he still had a pretty phenomenal game, even with him he's not even moving well, and he still walked out of there with 30 points in the loss, but 30 plus points. So I just need a bigger sample size before I completely throw Joel Embiid in the trash or start calling him Boston Celtics Shaq is what I saw on Twitter. So I need a bigger sample size of that. Going back to the tweet I just showed you by Tony Jones, he also wrote an article about it on The Athletic, and because that's behind a paywall, I can't really show you. But one of the main things was that Joel Embiid said, I can read it verbatim here. So this is him talking about the report that came out that Tyrese Maxey was trying to hold him accountable for being on time and being active and stuff like that. He said during the meeting, they talked about a lot of different things. I don't want to go into detail, but that whole part took about 40 seconds. But it's Joel Embiid, so things will always get blown out of proportion. It's whatever, though. I'll take it. I'm the reason for everything, so I guess I'll just take the blame for everything. He also added, it's kind of annoying having to deal with the same things over and over and over. Part of the, job of being a superstar player and being one of the best teams in basketball, or best players in basketball, is having to recognize that a lot of the shortcomings of your team will inevitably fall on your shoulders, whether it's warranted or not. And it's kind of weird to me that Joel Embiid has been one of the best players in basketball for this many years, and that's still not something he's come to terms with. And the part of it happened over and over and over again with him specifically, But going back to the basketball aspect of it all, these are the shooting splits of every person on the team. Like KJ Martin is shooting 50% from 3, very low volume. The only 2 players that are real parts of the rotation and are actually shooting it well is Gershon Yabusele, who's been very good at 42%, and Jared McCain, who's like Philly's superstar right now at 40%. Everybody else that is at least in the rotation, like Kyle Lowry looks like a corpse every other game. Caleb Martin is shooting 31%. Eric Gordon is shooting 29%. Paul George is 28%. Kelly Oubre is 27%. Tyrese Maxey on 10 attempts has been 26%. And Joel Embiid is shooting 16%. So they're having almost everything go absolutely wrong for them at the exact same time. I don't know how this ends up finishing out. I don't know if they have the best turnaround in the history of basketball, because there have been a lot of teams that started the season 2-12. Only like 7 of them have ever made the playoffs, and only 2 of them made the playoffs with a positive record. And as you can imagine, none of them ended up winning the championship, which is the ultimate aspirations for the Philadelphia 76ers. So it's still early in the season, and the Eastern Conference is bad enough that they're in trouble, but they're not in trouble when it comes to standings. But maybe more of that trouble comes to once we get to the postseason and we think about the overall outlook for the 76ers for the next coming season.